What happens when the legendary Italian pop queen Laura Pausini steps into the sweat-drenched, high-stakes dance studio of the biggest boy band on the planet? We all see the absolute magic BTS creates on stage, but behind closed doors, the raw reality of mastering those insanely complex routines is a completely different beast. Who actually absorbs the moves in the blink of an eye, and who genuinely has to grind through the night just to catch up? Does the main dancer naturally take the crown, or is there a hidden genius among the group who quietly outpaces the rest? Today, we are diving deep into the untold emotional secrets of their grueling practice room as Laura Pausini ranks every single BTS member based solely on their pure choreography learning speed. Prepare to have your mind blown and your long-held expectations entirely shattered. Are you completely ready to discover the shocking truth behind their sweat and tears?
Number 7. Namjoon. Imagine stepping into a dimly lit dance studio in Seoul at 2 in the morning, the air thick with exhaustion, the rhythmic squeaking of rubber soles against the hardwood floor echoing like a heartbeat, and the immense, almost suffocating pressure of global expectations hanging heavy in the room, where Laura Pausini sits quietly in the corner, her observant eyes capturing every single nuance of the world's biggest boy band as they break down a mind-bendingly complex routine. When the legendary Italian diva evaluated their learning speed, she immediately noticed a fascinating, almost heartbreakingly beautiful contrast in the member who anchors the entire group, the towering intellectual pillar and visionary leader, RM, who finds himself sitting at the very foundation of this list at number 7. Because while his brilliant mind operates at the speed of light, processing philosophical concepts, writing chart-topping lyrics, and guiding his brothers through unprecedented global fame, his physical muscle memory operates on a completely different, much more deliberate wavelength. Laura was deeply moved by the sheer vulnerability she witnessed when watching Namjoon learn. He is a man who was originally promised a pure hip-hop trajectory by Bang PD, a young underground rapper who never signed up to execute perfectly synchronized, gravity-defying backflips or intricate pop-locking. Yet here he is, years later, sweating through his t-shirt, staring intently into the massive wall-to-wall mirror with a mix of frustration and relentless determination. When the choreographer demonstrates a lightning-fast 8-count, members like J-Hope or Jimin might absorb the fluid motion in seconds, their bodies intuitively understanding the kinetic map. But RM approaches dance like a complex mathematical equation, his brain trying to logically decode the angle of the elbow, the pivot of the heel, and the shift of the center of gravity, which inevitably slows down his initial uptake and forces him into a grueling, repetitive grind. It is a profoundly emotional sight to behold, as Laura noted the quiet moments when the official practice ends and the rest of the crew collapses on the floor in exhaustion. RM stays behind, often pulling J-Hope aside with a humble, almost apologetic smile, asking his younger member to patiently break down the transition one more time, stripping away all his ego as a leader just to ensure he doesn't hold the team back on stage. This isn't just about being a slow learner. It is about the agonizing, invisible burden of leadership where you have to constantly project strength to the world while silently battling your own physical limitations in the shadowy hours of the night, repeatedly punishing your own body until the unnatural movements finally become second nature. Can you even begin to fathom the immense psychological resilience required to stand front and center at massive stadiums like Wembley or SoFi, executing flawless choreography when you know deep down that it took you 3 times as long and infinitely more tears and bruises to master that exact same sequence compared to the person standing right next to you? Laura Pausini saw right through the polished superstar facade and recognized a warrior in RM, observing how he physically wills himself into becoming a dancer, fighting against his own natural stiffness, his tall, somewhat uncoordinated frame initially resisting the smooth grooves required for tracks like Dynamite or the aggressive power needed for ON. Yet he never, ever gives up, not even for a split second. The intense, almost obsessive repetition he relies on is a testament to his profound love for BTS and their army, transforming what could be a glaring weakness into a massive, awe-inspiring display of pure grit that leaves everyone in the room, including a seasoned veteran like Laura, utterly speechless and deeply inspired. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many times has he stood in front of that unforgiving mirror, muscles screaming in agony, brain overloaded with schedules, speeches, and studio sessions, yet forcing himself to do just one more take, just one more spin, just one more jump. The reality of RM's position at number 7 isn't a mark of failure in the slightest. It is a magnificent, triumphant badge of honor that screams of his unparalleled work ethic, proving to the entire world that true artistry isn't always about natural-born talent or effortless grace, but rather about the messy, painful, exhausting, and beautifully human willingness to tear yourself apart and rebuild yourself from the ground up, step by agonizing step, just to keep the collective dream alive. This raw, unfiltered dedication completely shatters the illusion of effortless perfection, forcing us to look at the leader of BTS not just as a musical genius or a UN speaker, but as a deeply relatable human being who struggles, who fails, who gets frustrated, but who consistently chooses to rise again, wiping the sweat from his eyes, nodding to the music, and diving back into the relentless rhythm until he absolutely nails it, making us respect him on a level that goes far beyond music. Who else could carry the weight of the world on their shoulders while simultaneously learning how to fly on a dance floor they were never meant to step onto in the first place? Laura Pausini reflected on this deeply during her observation, noting how the dynamic of the practice room shifts when RM finally conquers a move that has been tormenting him for hours. The entire atmosphere lightens, the other members erupt into genuine, heartwarming cheers, and you can see a fleeting, beautiful smile of pure relief wash over his exhausted face, a moment of triumph that feels infinitely more rewarding precisely because it was born out of such immense struggle. When you look at the intricate footwork of Idol or the intense floor choreography of Black Swan, it's mind-boggling to realize the sheer volume of extra hours, the countless sleepless nights, and the silent, solitary battles fought behind closed doors by the man who was supposed to just stand behind a microphone and spit fire. He bridges the gap between his intellectual comfort zone and the brutal physical demands of K-pop with an unwavering spirit that commands absolute respect, proving that his mind, while initially a barrier to instant muscle memory, eventually becomes his greatest weapon as he memorizes the intricate counts and formations through sheer force of will and analytical breakdown. Laura felt an overwhelming sense of empathy and admiration, recognizing that in the high-stakes, hyper-competitive world of global entertainment, admitting your weaknesses and actively and painfully working to overcome them in front of your peers requires a level of emotional maturity and self-assurance that is incredibly rare. So, while RM might firmly hold the number 7 spot in terms of sheer speed when it comes to memorizing choreography, his slow, deliberate, and fiercely dedicated learning process reveals the beating, resilient heart of BTS, leaving us completely in awe of the blood, sweat, and literal tears that pave the golden road to their historic, record-breaking performances, and begging the ultimate question: what impossible mountain will this extraordinary leader conquer next? As you watch him flawlessly hit every single beat on stage today, enveloped in blinding laser lights and the deafening roar of tens of thousands of fans, you're actually witnessing the brilliant culmination of thousands of unseen, frustrating failures that he quietly transformed into dazzling victories, a testament to a spirit that absolutely refuses to be broken by its own limitations. Laura Pausini herself admitted that seeing RM's arduous but ultimately victorious journey in that sweaty, claustrophobic studio changed her entire perspective on what it means to be a true performer, shattering the illusion that pop perfection is simply handed down by the gods of talent and replacing it with the raw, visceral reality of human perseverance that cuts straight to the soul.
It is this exact willingness to be imperfect, to be the slowest in the room, but the hardest worker in the building, that solidifies RM's legendary status, not just as a global icon, but as a profoundly inspiring symbol of relentless dedication for anyone who has ever felt like they were falling behind.
Number 6 BTS Jin. When Laura Pausini shifted her observant gaze across that relentlessly humid, mirror-lined rehearsal space, her eyes inevitably locked on to the eldest brother of the group, a man whose ridiculously flawless features famously earned him the title of worldwide handsome, but whose deeply hidden internal struggles on the dance floor place him securely at number 6 on our choreography learning countdown. Picture this intense reality. You are Kim Seok-jin, a young, aspiring actor walking down the street, suddenly scouted entirely for your devastatingly good looks, possessing absolutely zero background in rhythm, vocal technique, or the agonizingly complex world of hip-hop dance. And suddenly, you are thrust headfirst into a brutal idol training system that demands absolute physical perfection from day one. It is a profoundly jarring, almost unfair starting line that Laura observed with a deep sense of empathetic heartbreak, noticing exactly how Jin approaches the frantic, hyperkinetic choreography sessions not with the innate swagger of a street dancer, but with the painstaking, calculated discipline of an actor trying desperately to memorize the most physically demanding, torturous script of his entire life. When the resident dance line starts flawlessly gliding across the floor, effortlessly catching the intricate syncopations and rapid-fire footwork within mere minutes, you can almost see the invisible gears grinding violently in Jin's head as his analytical brain desperately commands his naturally stiff, incredibly broad-shouldered frame to bend, snap, and isolate in ways his body was never organically designed to do. He isn't inherently slow at memorizing the actual numerical counts. In fact, his sharp academic mind grasped the structural sequence relatively well, but translating that mental map into fluid, explosive physical execution takes a monumental, excruciatingly repetitive toll that forces him into a relentless cycle of trial, error, and intense physical pain that would easily break a lesser artist. Have you ever stopped to wonder what it truly costs a person to mask their deepest, darkest insecurities behind a booming laugh, a barrage of iconic windshield wiper giggles, and an impenetrable shield of endless dad jokes, only to wait until the cameras finally stop rolling to silently beat themselves up over a single missed transition? Laura saw right through the cheerful, boisterous persona that Jin projects to the entire world, zeroing in on those incredibly quiet, profoundly solitary moments when the official practice wraps up at 3 in the morning, and while the younger members finally collapse on the hardwood or head back to the dorms to rest, the eldest quietly remains behind, staring at his sweaty reflection with a piercing, highly critical intensity that would absolutely shatter your heart into a million pieces. He forces himself to drill that one specific chorus jump, that one intricate hand gesture, over and over and over again, until his muscles practically scream in absolute agony and his t-shirt is completely soaked through with sweat, driven by a quiet, fierce, almost terrifying desperation to never, ever be the weak link that drags his beloved younger brothers down on the global stage. It is an emotionally devastating but endlessly inspiring sight to witness this hidden, grueling grind that happens entirely out of the spotlight, where Jin secretly hires private choreographers on his rare days off, or practices completely alone in his hotel room until the crack of dawn, just to ensure that when it is finally time to stand under those blinding stadium lights, he blends perfectly into the seamless, breathtaking beast that is BTS. Laura Pausini was visibly moved by this profound, entirely selfless dedication, recognizing that while Jimin or Jungkook might be fueled by a natural, burning passion for the art of dance itself, Jin is fueled by a pure, unadulterated love for his team and a terrifyingly strong sense of responsibility as the eldest young, pushing his mortal body far beyond its natural physiological limits solely for the sake of the collective dream.
The physical limitations he faces are undeniably real. His tall stature and famously wide shoulders naturally make intricate, fluid body isolations incredibly difficult, often requiring him to exert literally twice the physical effort to make a specific move look as effortless and razor-sharp as the others.
Number 5. BTS Suga. When the blinding spotlight shifts and Laura Pausini's piercing, analytical gaze moves slightly to the left of the relentlessly humid rehearsal mirror, it lands directly on the most complex, delightfully paradoxical figure in the entire BTS lineup, the fiercely independent underground rapper turned global idol, Min Yoongi, better known as Suga, who secures the completely fascinating number 5 spot on our ultimate choreography countdown. To truly understand exactly why Yoongi sits perfectly in the middle of this intense, high-stakes ranking, you have to mentally travel back to the gritty, dimly lit underground hip-hop clubs of Daegu, where a young, hungry producer with fire in his eyes and a razor-sharp tongue signed a contract with Big Hit Entertainment under the absolute, explicit promise from Bank PD that he would merely have to stand on stage, nod his head to the rhythm, and focus entirely on spitting his legendary rapid-fire rap verses. He was famously and hilariously tricked into becoming a synchronized pop dancer. Yet here he is, more than a decade later, executing gravity-defying, violently intricate routines that leave seasoned professional dancers gasping for breath, completely shattering the illusion of his famously lethargic grandpa persona that he so cleverly projects on variety shows. Laura observed this staggering dichotomy with profound fascination, noting how Suga often walks into the practice studio dragging his feet, holding an iced Americano like an absolute lifeline, seemingly possessing zero energy or desire to move a single muscle. But the absolute split second the thumping bass of the track drops, a terrifyingly sharp, undeniable hip-hop groove takes complete possession of his physical body. He is not a natural-born technical dancer in the classical sense like Jimin, nor does he possess the terrifyingly precise, explosive body control of J-Hop, but what elevates Suga to this highly respectable number 5 position is his sheer, unadulterated musical genius, his producer's brain fundamentally processing the complex choreography not as physical movements, but as highly intricate mathematical subdivisions of musical beats. While other members might need to physically mirror the choreographer's elbow angles or hip isolations repeatedly to build muscle memory, Yoongi stands quietly in the back, his dark eyes narrowed in deep concentration, mentally mapping every single pop, lock, and drop directly to the snare drums, the hi-hats, and the hidden syncopations of the instrumental track that he likely helped compose himself. This profound, deeply ingrained musicality allows him to absorb the timing of the routine surprisingly fast, catching the rhythm with an effortless, almost arrogant swagger that naturally masks any slight lack of technical polish, making him a dangerously effective visual anchor in massive high-energy tracks like Mic Drop or the blisteringly fast footwork of Run BTS. But what truly moved Laura to the core, adding an incredibly heavy, profoundly emotional layer to his ranking, is the deeply tragic, hidden physical reality that Yoongi silently battled for years, an agonizing, devastating shoulder injury sustained during a tragic accident while working as a delivery boy before their debut. A harrowing secret he kept violently suppressed from the world and even from his own members for a long time, out of a terrifying fear of being kicked out of the group. Can you even begin to fathom the sheer, monumental agony of having to learn and perfectly execute highly aggressive, joint-snapping choreography for 7 long years with a severely torn labrum, smiling brightly for the flashing stadium cameras while your shoulder threatens to literally dislocate with every single powerful arm swing? Laura saw right through the stoic, impenetrable armor of the Daegu boy, realizing that his learning process was entirely uniquely tailored to accommodate this agonizing chronic pain. He had to invent completely new, highly modified ways to execute the exact same massive movements as the others without tearing his own body apart, requiring an astronomical level of real-time physical calculation and intense adaptation that makes his learning speed incredibly impressive.
He doesn't just learn the dance, he painstakingly translates the dance into a language his damaged, fragile body can temporarily survive. A breathtaking act of silent martyrdom that radically redefines what it means to be deeply dedicated to your craft. When you watch the behind-the-scenes footage and see Yoongi quietly stepping out of formation to massage his throbbing shoulder, his face pale and tight with suppressed agony, only to fiercely bite his lip, snap right back into line, and effortlessly hit the next 8 count with that signature devastating smirk, you are witnessing an absolutely awe-inspiring display of human resilience that goes so far beyond mere pop stardom it is almost difficult to comprehend. He frequently adopts a charmingly cynical tsundere attitude, loudly complaining about the physical exertion, playfully whining that the dances are getting too difficult for his aging bones. But Laura noted with a warm smile that this is all just a meticulously crafted defense mechanism, a brilliant smokescreen to hide the simple, undeniable fact that Min Yoongi cares deeply, passionately, and almost obsessively about the flawless perfection of BTS's collective stage presence. When a brand new, highly complex routine is introduced, he might not be the very first one jumping up to try it like the Maknae line, but he absorbs the visual data incredibly efficiently, standing perfectly still like a highly advanced supercomputer downloading a massive file. And then, almost out of nowhere, he effortlessly drops into the groove, catching the exact intended vibe of the song much faster than those who struggle with the inherent rhythm. His secret weapon is his undeniably deep roots in underground b-boying culture during his early teenage years, a forgotten past that gifted him with a surprisingly low center of gravity and a fantastic natural bounce that makes his execution of hip-hop-leaning choreography look incredibly authentic, raw, and deliciously unfiltered. The brutal, unforgiving idol industry constantly demands absolute robotic perfection, but Suga brings a desperately needed, highly intoxicating dose of raw, gritty attitude to the dance floor, deliberately adding his own lazy yet sharp swag to the synchronized formations, proving that you don't need to be the most flexible or the most classically trained to completely dominate the center camera and steal the entire show. Laura Pausini reflected intensely on this brilliant juxtaposition, deeply respecting the fact that Suga never tries to be a dancer he is not. He completely owns his unique, swag-heavy style, turning what could potentially be perceived as a slight stiffness into an unbelievably cool, laid-back aesthetic that perfectly complements the hyper-energetic chaos of the members surrounding him. Have you ever critically analyzed his specific movements during the devastatingly intense dance break of ON, where the sheer physical stamina required is enough to make professional athletes crumble in pure exhaustion? Suga keeps pace seamlessly, his breaths heavily measured, his focus laser-sharp, utilizing every single ounce of his immense mental fortitude to command his body to push through the burning lactic acid, completely driven by the electrifying roar of the invisible crowd in his mind. Laura observed that his incredibly fast learning speed in these specific high-stress situations is actually a direct byproduct of his legendary, fiercely focused studio work ethic. Just as he can lock himself in his genius lab for 48 hours straight, meticulously producing a chart-topping hit track by obsessively tweaking a single hi-hat sound until it reaches absolute sonic perfection, he applies that exact same terrifying, hyper-focused obsession to mastering the choreography. He mentally loops the 8 counts in his head the exact same way he loops a vocal sample in his producing software, isolating the problematic transitions, intellectually dissecting the biomechanics of the movement, and instantly reprogramming his physical execution with the cold, calculated precision of a seasoned maestro. It is this deeply analytical, musically driven approach that completely bypasses the traditional, slower muscle memory struggles faced by Jin and RM, allowing Yoongi to rapidly jump up the ranking to this solid number 5 position, proving his genius extends far beyond the recording booth. But it is never just about the sheer speed. It is profoundly about the immense, unspoken sacrifices required to maintain that speed. The invisible bandages wrapped tightly around his joints, the heavy ice packs secretly applied in the dark corners of the dressing room, and the silent, solitary prayers for his body to just hold out for one more brutal world tour. When Laura Pausini finally left that incredibly humid, emotionally charged practice studio, she confessed that the image permanently seared into her mind wasn't the breathtaking, effortless, acrobatic flips of the dance line, but rather the quiet, indomitable spirit of Min Yoongi, standing perfectly in his designated spot, slightly out of breath, offering a tiny, almost imperceptible nod of satisfaction to the mirror, a fiercely proud, battle-scarred musical genius who systematically conquered the alien world of K-pop choreography on his absolute own terms, redefining what it means to be a true, multifaceted legend in the modern era of global entertainment.
Number 4. BTS V. As the intense, suffocating heat of the Seoul practice studio continues to rise and the exhausting hours blur into a relentless marathon of sweat, adrenaline, and screaming muscles, Laura Pausini's captivated. Observant eyes are irresistibly drawn to a member who completely defies every single logical convention of traditional dance training. The enigmatic, deeply soulful visual powerhouse, Kim Taehyung, known globally as V, who effortlessly claims the highly coveted number 4 position on our ranking. What makes Taehyung's specific learning process so incredibly fascinating, and frankly, completely mind-boggling to witness firsthand, is that he fundamentally rejects the mechanical, highly analytical approach used by the older members of the group. He does not meticulously count the agonizing numerical beats in his head like RM, nor does he aggressively drill the geometric angles of his joints like Jin, but instead, he operates entirely on an otherworldly plane of pure, unadulterated, emotional intuition and terrifyingly sharp visual mimicry. Imagine watching a fiercely focused artist standing casually at the very back of the room, often dressed in ridiculously baggy, eccentric vintage clothing, completely barefoot or wearing casual loafers, looking almost as if he is daydreaming about a distant galaxy while the choreographer violently breaks down a rapid-fire, 32-count hip-hop sequence. To the untrained eye, he appears delightfully distracted, perhaps even slightly disconnected from the grueling physical reality of the room, but Laura quickly realized with a profound sense of shock that Taehyung's beautifully complex brain functions exactly like a high-speed, emotional sponge. He only needs to watch the routine a mere handful of times before his body instinctively understands not just the physical trajectory of the complicated movement, but the deep underlying emotional texture and the specific atmospheric vibe of the song itself. When he finally steps forward to execute the freshly taught sequence alongside the others, it is nothing short of pure, unadulterated magic. He doesn't just mechanically replicate the steps, he instantly breathes a dark, intoxicating, highly theatrical life into them, completely transforming a standard pop lock into an agonizing expression of heartbreak, or turning a simple, synchronized body roll into a lethal, heart-stopping display of raw, magnetic charisma that absolutely commands your undivided attention and leaves you gasping for air. The older members of BTS have frequently and openly marveled at the specific, uncanny ability, playfully expressing their immense, light-hearted jealousy over how V can spend half the arduous practice session goofing around, playing with Yeontan the studio dog, or completely spacing out staring at his own reflection, only to flawlessly nail the intricate transition the very second the real backing track begins to echo through the massive speakers. This innate, terrifyingly fast muscle memory is deeply rooted in his profound, highly eclectic musical background. Remember, this is the boy from Daegu who originally trained to be a professional saxophone player, a young, old soul deeply immersed in the unpredictable, highly improvisational world of classical jazz and R&B, which fundamentally wired his brain to perceive rhythm not as a rigid, unyielding mathematical grid, but as a fluid, breathing, living entity that can be creatively stretched, manipulated, and played with on a whim. Laura was deeply moved by the sheer, devastating duality of his existence within that claustrophobic, mirror-lined room. One moment he is the soft, incredibly pure-hearted good boy, offering endearing, boxy smiles to his physically exhausted brothers, and the very next millisecond, a dark shadow violently crosses his incredibly striking features, His eyes darken with a fierce, predatory intensity, and he morphs into the untouchable stage demon that single-handedly broke the internet with his legendary, spine-chilling performance of Singularity. Have you ever truly considered the immense, unspoken psychological pressure of possessing a face so universally heralded as the most handsome in the world, knowing with absolute certainty that millions of people will initially judge you solely on your breathtaking visual aesthetic, entirely dismissing or underestimating the grueling, bone-crushing hard work you constantly pour into your craft behind the scenes? Taehyung brilliantly uses this very prejudice as his ultimate, hidden secret weapon, flawlessly masking his intense physical exertion and sheer exhaustion behind an impenetrable veil of absolute, effortless cool, making it look as though he simply woke up that morning, elegantly stretched his long limbs, and accidentally executed the most complicated, physically demanding choreography of the decade with absolute zero practice. However, Laura Pausini, with her seasoned veteran instincts, noticed the incredibly subtle, highly endearing moments of vulnerability that occasionally betray his cool, untouchable facade. The slight, frustrated pout of his lips when a specific, highly technical, rapid-fire footwork sequence doesn't naturally flow with his body's innate, laid-back groove, or the quiet, intense way he secretly pulls his soulmate Jimin aside into a dark corner, completely shedding his global superstar pride to desperately ask for a breakdown of a tricky, counterintuitive weight shift. This beautiful, humanizing struggle is exactly why he sits perfectly at number 4, brilliantly straddling the invisible line between the hard-working mortals and the untouchable, innate dance prodigies. His learning speed is undeniably, shockingly fast when the choreography relies heavily on groove, intricate facial expressions, and deep theatrical storytelling, allowing him to absorb the absolute essence of iconic, atmosphere-heavy tracks like Blood, Sweat, and Tears, or Butter in absolute record time. Yet, when confronted with highly rigid, hyper-synchronized, mechanically aggressive routines like Danger or the brutal marching band precision of On, his natural, free-spirited jazz instincts occasionally clash violently with the strict, unyielding demands of K-pop synchronization, requiring him to momentarily suppress his unique, wildly artistic flair and force his body to conform to the collective, robotic perfection demanded by the industry. It is a deeply emotional, powerful sight to watch him actively fight against his own extraordinary, free-flowing nature, willingly putting his own magnificent, unique artistic signature on a tight leash purely out of a deep, fiercely loyal, and unconditional love for his team, silently sacrificing his own artistic comfort zone just to ensure the BTS formation remains an impenetrable, flawless fortress of visual and rhythmic unity. Laura Pausini confessed to her entourage later that watching V learn a brand new choreography is exactly like watching a master painter violently and passionately splash vibrant, chaotic colors onto a massive blank canvas. Initially, it might seem slightly reckless, entirely unstructured, and driven purely by manic inspiration, until you take a step back and suddenly realize he has flawlessly created a breathtaking, multi-dimensional masterpiece that perfectly captures the very bleeding soul of the music itself. His extraordinary, often misunderstood journey in that sweaty practice room completely shatters the toxic, industry-standard myth that true talent must always look like agonizing, visible, tear-stained suffering. Taehyung proves to the entire world that there is immense, undeniable power in finding your own unique, relaxed rhythm, and that true, heart-stopping artistry is ultimately born when you completely stop counting the physical steps and finally start fiercely feeling the music deep within your very bones, a profound, life-altering realization that permanently cements his legendary status and leaves every single observer, including a seasoned global pop diva, completely and utterly spellbound by his deeply mesmerizing, beautifully untamable spirit. Number 3. BTS Jungkook. When the stifling, ozone-heavy air of the big hit practice room reaches its absolute boiling point and the sheer physical exhaustion threatens to completely break the collective spirit of the group, Laura Pausini's intensely observant eyes lock onto a mesmerizing, unstoppable force of nature. The undisputed center and fiercely beloved youngest brother of the mega group, Jungkook, who rightfully claims the incredibly prestigious, highly competitive number 3 spot on our ultimate choreography learning countdown. To fully comprehend exactly why the legendary Golden Magne A young man globally revered for being phenomenally gifted at literally everything he touches, sits at number 3 rather than the absolute pinnacle. You must first dive deep into the profoundly fascinating, incredibly intense psychological and physical paradox that defines his very existence in that grueling, sweat-drenched studio. Imagine being scouted by multiple major entertainment companies as a mere middle schooler, arriving in Seoul as a terrifyingly shy, starry-eyed teenager, only to have the astronomical, crushing weight of the world's biggest pop phenomenon placed directly squarely upon your rapidly broadening shoulders, actively forcing you to become the ultimate, impenetrable shield and the flawlessly dazzling spearhead for your 6 older brothers. Laura watched in absolute, unadulterated awe as the choreographer introduced a blistering, violently aggressive new dance sequence, noticing how Jungkook doesn't just watch the instructor. His massive, doe-like eyes widen with a terrifying, predatory hyper-focus, mentally downloading every single millimeter of the movement with the terrifyingly cold, flawless precision of a high-tech athletic supercomputer. His natural physical aptitude is so unbelievably off the charts that it borders on the supernatural. He boasts a perfectly engineered, heavily muscled frame that inherently understands the complex biomechanics of kinetic energy, allowing him to absorb and flawlessly replicate highly intricate pop and lock transitions, sweeping floor work, and gravity-defying aerial acrobatics in a mere fraction of the time it takes the vocal line. But what truly sets Jungkook apart, and what deeply moved Laura Pausini to the very core of her veteran musical soul, is the heartbreakingly beautiful, relentlessly punishing perfectionism that secretly haunts his every single waking moment behind those closed, mirrored doors. When Jungkook learns a routine, it is absolutely never, ever enough for him to simply memorize the counts or hit the correct geometric angles. His fiercely competitive spirit demands that he instantly injects every single micro-movement with an explosive, staggering level of raw, unbridled physical power that pushes his mortal body dangerously close to its absolute breaking point. Have you ever critically watched the devastatingly intense, breath-stealing dance break of On, or the aggressively sharp, impossibly fast footwork of Idol, and wondered how a single human being can exert that much sheer, terrifying force without his muscles literally tearing themselves apart in the process? Laura saw the hidden, agonizing cost of this relentless power output firsthand. While members like V might naturally ride the fluid groove of the beat, Jungkook actively wages a violent, beautiful war against the choreography, repeatedly drilling the exact same physically exhausting jump or the grueling, knee-shattering drop 100 times over long after he has already perfectly memorized the steps, utterly refusing to stop until the execution reaches a terrifying, god-like level of absolute physical perfection. It is a profoundly emotional, almost devastating sight to behold, as Laura noted the quiet, solitary moments when the official practice finally ends at 4 in the morning, and while the older members finally collapse in a heap of exhausted, breathless relief, the youngest absolutely refuses to leave the floor, angrily wiping the blinding sweat from his eyes, his heavily tattooed arms flexing with immense frustration as he brutally punishes his own body for a microscopic, invisible mistake that no one else in the room even noticed. This massive, unspoken psychological burden of being the golden prodigy means that the entire world, and often his own deeply ingrained imposter syndrome, fundamentally expects him to be flawlessly brilliant on the very first try, completely stripping away his fundamental human right to fail, to struggle, or to openly ask for help. Imagine the suffocating, astronomical pressure of knowing that the absolute split second you step onto the center of that massive stadium stage, millions of high-definition cameras will be heavily zoomed in on your every single breath, waiting to capture a singular moment of weakness, effectively forcing you to permanently lock away your sheer physical agony behind a bright, blindingly beautiful, bunny-like smile that makes the impossible look effortlessly easy. Laura Pausini reflected intensely on this beautiful, tragic reality, realizing that Jungkook's learning speed is undeniably terrifyingly fast. He effortlessly outpaces the majority of the group with his sheer athletic genius, but he places himself at number 3 because he deliberately, painstakingly slows down his own final mastery process to obsessively fine-tune the raw power, the explosive dynamics, and the breathtaking vocal stability required to sing live while dancing like a completely unhinged powerhouse. He constantly, almost obsessively watches the 2 main dancers, J-Hope and Jimin, using their foundational street and contemporary techniques as a golden benchmark, desperately pushing his own phenomenal self-taught body to somehow bridge the gap between a naturally gifted athletic prodigy and a classically trained, lifelong master of dance. When you see him absolutely dominating the stage in Fake Love, violently throwing his entire upper body into the agonizing marionette-like choreography with a fierce, burning desperation in his eyes, you are actually witnessing the magnificent, breathtaking culmination of thousands of unseen, intensely frustrating, and deeply lonely midnight hours where the youngest brother silently swallowed his own tears, laced up his heavy combat boots, and voluntarily went to war against his own sky-high expectations. It completely shatters the toxic, incredibly naive illusion that massive, global talent is simply a free, painless gift from the heavens. Jungkook proves with every single drop of his sweat that true, legendary greatness is actively, violently ripped from the jaws of exhaustion, forged in the relentless, fiery crucible of a completely unforgiving work ethic that would completely destroy a lesser man in a matter of days. Laura confessed that the specific image permanently seared into her veteran memory wasn't the roaring crowds or the glittering trophies, but the raw, unfiltered image of Jungkook standing alone in the center of that claustrophobic practice room, his chest heaving violently, his heavy black t-shirt completely soaked right through, staring deeply into his own reflection not with arrogance, but with a fierce, beautifully humble hunger to be just 1% better than he was yesterday. Profoundly inspiring, heartbreakingly dedicated young warrior who single-handedly redefines the true meaning of passion, permanently cementing his unbreakable legacy as the fiercely beating, unstoppable golden heart of BTS. Number 2. BTS Jimin. As the agonizingly intense countdown inches breathtakingly close to its absolute, undisputed zenith, and the stifling, ozone-heavy atmosphere of that legendary, mirror-lined Seoul rehearsal studio crackles with an almost palpable, electric anticipation, Laura Pausini's deeply captivated, seasoned eyes finally land on the mesmerizing, angelic centerpiece of the group, the phenomenally gifted contemporary dance prodigy, Park Jimin, who elegantly and fiercely claims the breathtaking number 2 spot on this highly competitive choreography ranking. To fundamentally understand exactly how this incredibly ethereal, beautifully fluid performer operates on such a staggering, almost supernatural level of physical genius, you must forcefully rip yourself away from the blinding stadium lights and mentally travel all the way back to the quiet, highly disciplined classical ballet and contemporary dance studios of the prestigious Busan High School of Arts, where a young, ferociously dedicated prodigy was intensely molded into an absolute master of emotional storytelling through movement. Laura watched in pure, unadulterated awe as Jimin effortlessly shattered the deeply ingrained, rigid boundaries of traditional K-pop choreography, completely refusing to simply execute the rapid-fire, mechanical hip-hop angles dictated by the instructor, but instead choosing to organically weave his own breathtaking, deeply sensual, and agonizingly beautiful contemporary lines into every single micro-movement. When a brand new, terrifyingly complex dance sequence is introduced to the exhausted room, Jimin's physical uptake is so incredibly, shockingly fast that it completely defies logical human anatomy. His highly trained, hyper-flexible muscles possess a terrifyingly sharp, innate intelligence that instantly absorbs the kinetic map of the routine in a mere fraction of a second, rivaling even the absolute fastest learners in the entire global industry. Have you ever truly marveled at the devastatingly gorgeous, gravity-defying leaps in Black Swan, the dangerously alluring, iconic jacket drop in Blood, Sweat, and Tears, or the intensely theatrical, mind-bending isolations of his solo track Lie, and wondered how a single human being can simultaneously appear as fragile as a delicate glass sculpture and as explosive as a fully loaded cannon? Laura Pausini immediately recognized this staggering, beautiful duality, noticing how Jimin perfectly memorizes the actual mathematical counts just as fast as the undisputed dance leader, but he actively, consciously places himself at number 2 because he completely refuses to move on until the specific feeling of the choreography is absolutely flawless and emotionally devastating. While other highly skilled members might be fully satisfied with simply hitting the correct physical mark exactly on the beat, Jimin dives headfirst into a grueling, incredibly painful and highly emotional internal war, obsessively agonizing over the precise, delicate angle of his fingertips, the dramatic, sweeping arc of his neck, and the terrifyingly intense, seductive gaze in his dark eyes, actively demanding a level of theatrical perfection from himself that is almost psychologically terrifying to witness firsthand. Can you even begin to imagine the crushing, suffocating psychological weight of constantly battling your own deeply rooted toxic imposter syndrome, knowing exactly that you were the very last member to finally join the official debut lineup, and that you terrifyingly faced the very real threat of being completely cut from the group countless times before your massive global introduction? This deeply hidden, profoundly traumatic insecurity acts as a massive, intensely burning furnace within his very soul, fiercely driving him to ruthlessly punish his own body, deliberately pushing his fragile joints and heavily taped muscles far beyond the natural limits of human endurance just to prove, over and over again, that he fundamentally deserves his rightful, permanent spot under that blinding global spotlight. Laura saw right through his beautiful, angelic, reassuring eye smiles, intimately witnessing the dark, silent moments of absolute, devastating exhaustion when he suddenly collapses onto the cold hardwood floor, his lungs desperately gasping for oxygen, quietly wrapping heavy ice packs around his chronically aching neck and heavily bruised knees, only to violently force himself back up onto his feet. The absolute millisecond the heavy bass of Fake Love rattles the massive studio windows. It is an intensely emotional, deeply moving masterclass in pure, unyielding human resilience, a breathtaking testament to a man who brutally transformed his own deeply ingrained insecurities into a legendary, untouchable superpower, using his agonizing past struggles as the very rocket fuel that violently launched him into the highest echelons of global dance royalty. His specific, painstakingly difficult transition from the fluid, highly expressive, emotionally driven world of classical contemporary dance into the aggressive, rigidly synchronized, incredibly heavy stomping of underground hip-hop was an incredibly brutal, physically jarring process that initially caused him immense, terrifying frustration, actively forcing him to fundamentally unlearn years of classical muscle memory just to properly execute the raw, gritty street styles required by big hit entertainment. Yet, instead of completely abandoning his beautiful classical roots, he brilliantly, successfully engineered an entirely new, deeply intoxicating hybrid style of dance that the entire world had literally never seen before, seamlessly blending the lethal, sharp shooting precision of a highly trained urban street dancer with the breathtaking, agonizing grace of a dying swan gracefully falling from the sky. Laura Pausini confessed that watching Jimin learn a brand new choreography is exactly like watching a deeply tormented, wildly passionate classical artist violently bleed onto a massive, pristine blank canvas, physically pouring every single ounce of his immense joy, his hidden pain, and his sheer, unadulterated desperation into the intricate steps until the movement fundamentally transcends the physical realm and becomes a purely spiritual, deeply intoxicating experience that completely paralyzes the viewer in absolute awe. When you see him aggressively dominating the center stage in the devastatingly powerful dance break of On, flawlessly executing an impossibly high, violently sharp aerial kick while simultaneously delivering a perfectly stable, piercingly high vocal note, you are not simply watching a massively talented pop idol. You are actively bearing witness to a magnificent, hard-fought, and incredibly painful victory over his own mind and deeply exhausted body. The sheer, terrifying speed at which he intuitively masters the most intricate, mind-boggling steps is undeniably breathtaking. But it is the devastating, unseen midnight hours he spends entirely alone in the dark, relentlessly drilling a single solitary hip isolation or a painfully precise blindfolded turn in front of the unforgiving mirror until tears of pure, blinding exhaustion literally stream down his flawless face, that permanently solidifies his absolute legendary status and effortlessly commands the absolute, breathless respect of every single person in that intensely humid room. He is the fiercely beating, incredibly sensitive artistic soul of BTS, a profoundly inspiring, deeply emotional warrior who silently bleeds out of the limelight behind the closed, heavy doors of the practice studio so that the entire world can flawlessly experience the absolute, breathtaking illusion of effortless, angelic perfection, leaving Laura Pausini and millions of fiercely dedicated fans globally, completely and utterly spellbound by his deeply agonizing, brilliantly beautiful sacrifice that redefines the very essence of modern performance art. Number 1. The absolute dance commander, the underground street legend, J-Hope. When the grueling, agonizing hours of relentless practice have finally shattered the physical resolve of almost everyone in that suffocatingly hot, tightly enclosed, mirror-lined Seoul studio, and the legendary Laura Pausini finds herself sitting on the very edge of her seat, completely paralyzed by sheer, unadulterated awe, she witnesses the ultimate, indisputable apex of this entire global choreography countdown, the absolute, undeniable heartbeat and foundational pillar of the group's world. Class performance, the fierce, terrifyingly precise dance leader himself, Jung Hoseok, universally known as J-Hope, who completely effortlessly and rightfully obliterates any and all competition to claim the absolute #1 spot. To even begin to fathom the terrifying, almost supernatural speed at which this extraordinarily gifted man operates, you must completely erase everything you thought you knew about traditional manufactured idol training and mentally transport yourself far away from the glittering lights of Seoul, all the way back to the gritty, intensely fierce, and highly competitive underground street dance battles of Gwangju, where a young, incredibly hungry, and dangerously talented prodigy known as Smile Hoya built an absolutely untouchable, legendary reputation solely on his raw, explosive ability to completely dominate any dance floor he ever touched as a core member of the famous Neuron dance crew. Laura watched in absolute, breathless fascination as the incredibly demanding choreographer introduced a brand new, terrifyingly complex, lightning-fast sequence that left the rest of the room momentarily stunned. Yet J-Hope did not blink, did not hesitate, and did not need to aggressively analyze the anatomical angles like RM or Jean. His deeply conditioned, highly advanced physical body fundamentally processes kinetic energy and rhythmic subdivisions just as naturally and effortlessly as the average human being breathes oxygen into their lungs. His physical uptake is so obscenely, shockingly fast that it completely defies logical scientific explanation. He only needs to see a complicated 32-count movement demonstrated exactly once, and his terrifyingly sharp, highly engineered muscle memory instantly downloads the entire sequence, flawlessly replicating the precise popping, the intricate locking, and the devastatingly smooth, heavy hip-hop isolations with a level of absolute perfection that often leaves the professional choreographers themselves entirely speechless. But what truly elevates J-Hope to this completely untouchable, godlike status at the very top of our list, and what moved Laura Pausini to the absolute core of her veteran artistic soul, is the massive, devastatingly heavy, and profoundly unselfish emotional burden he actively chooses to carry upon his shoulders every single day, because he doesn't just learn the choreography at the speed of light for his own personal perfection. He simultaneously, brilliantly learns the exact formations, the specific timing, and the individual physical limitations of all 6 other members so he can act as the vital, indispensable bridge between the intensely strict choreographers and his desperately struggling brothers. Have you ever truly considered the immense, suffocating psychological weight of being the designated, absolute anchor for the biggest, most heavily scrutinized boy band on the face of the planet, knowing with absolute certainty that if the collective synchronization fails on a massive global stage like the Grammy Awards or the Billboard Music Awards, the heavy, crushing blame will inevitably fall squarely upon your shoulders as the official dance leader? Laura saw right through the blindingly bright, incredibly loud, and infectiously happy sunshine persona that Hoseok flawlessly projects to the global media, intimately witnessing the dark, incredibly intense, and almost terrifying metamorphosis he undergoes the absolute millisecond he steps through those heavy studio doors, entirely shedding his cheerful, accommodating nature to become a fiercely strict, uncompromising drill sergeant with absolutely terrifying, predatory hawk eyes that miss absolutely nothing. It is a profoundly emotional, incredibly jarring contrast to behold. The very same man who offers endless, warm hugs and boisterous laughter on Variety shows suddenly completely changes his entire aura, his face turning entirely stone cold, his sharp jawline clenched, as he aggressively claps his hands to the heavy beat, forcefully demanding that RM lower his center of gravity, sharply correcting Jin's rigid elbow placement, and fiercely pushing the golden magne, Jungkook, to pull back on his explosive power just enough to perfectly match the collective, synchronized breathing of the entire group. This silent, beautiful sacrifice of his own inherent, good-natured popularity within the group, willingly choosing to be the temporary bad guy who keeps them heavily disciplined in the practice room for endless, agonizing hours so they can ultimately shine flawlessly as an impenetrable unit on stage, is a breathtaking display of pure, unconditional love and phenomenal leadership that left Laura absolutely spellbound. When you watch the devastatingly aggressive, iconic dance break of Mic Drop, or the breathtakingly intricate, emotionally agonizing contemporary floor work of Black Swan, and you see J-Hope flawlessly commanding the absolute center with a terrifyingly powerful, unyielding charisma, you are actively witnessing a man who has fundamentally sacrificed millions of hours of his own personal comfort, entirely dedicating his physical existence to elevating the absolute standard of performance art itself. He inherently possesses a terrifyingly deep, intuitive understanding of the specific musical texture, instinctively knowing exactly when to violently snap his joints with explosive, aggressive power, and precisely when to seamlessly melt into a smooth, liquid-like groove, effortlessly blending the raw, dirty, unfiltered attitude of old-school street hip-hop with the highly polished, meticulously sharp, and rigidly calculated synchronization demanded by the billion-dollar K-pop industry, creating an entirely untouchable, brilliantly unique hybrid style that absolutely nobody else in the world can replicate. Laura deeply reflected on the highly emotional, deeply vulnerable moments she observed during the rare water breaks, noting how incredibly physically taxing this relentless, perfectionist mindset is on Hoseok's own body. Despite his superhuman stamina, the sheer amount of energy he expends by literally dancing the routine for himself and then mentally dancing it 6 more times while heavily monitoring the others leaves him completely, utterly drained, collapsing into a silent corner with a heavy towel draped completely over his head, entirely alone in his exhaustion, yet fiercely, stubbornly refusing to show even a single ounce of weakness to the members who so desperately rely on his unwavering strength. What happens when the absolute best dancer in the room is also the hardest, most relentlessly unforgiving worker, constantly pushing his own sky-high limits just to ensure he absolutely never disappoints the astronomical expectations of millions of dedicated fans who look up to him as a beacon of flawless hope? It is precisely this unbelievable, unbreakable combination of pure, God-given street talent, terrifyingly fast, instantaneous mental processing speed, and an impossibly deep, self-sacrificing devotion to the flawless unity of the entire team that permanently cements Jung Hoseok as the undisputed, absolute king of the practice room. The fiery, beating core of BTS's legendary stage presence, leaving Laura Pausini, and every single soul who truly understands the devastatingly hard work behind the glamorous curtain, completely breathless, deeply inspired, and eternally respectful of the greatest, most fiercely dedicated performer of this modern generation.
So there you absolutely have it, the completely raw, unfiltered, and intensely emotional ranking of how fast the members of the world's biggest group actually absorb their incredibly grueling choreography, beautifully judged through the deeply observant, highly experienced eyes of the legendary Laura Pausini. What we have ultimately discovered today completely shatters the beautifully polished, heavily manufactured illusion that global pop domination is simply handed out to those with natural-born rhythm. Instead, we have been dragged headfirst into a highly emotional, deeply inspiring world where pure talent is just a starting line, and the true, devastatingly heavy price of legendary greatness is paid in endless solitary midnight hours, agonizing physical pain, heavily bruised knees, and a terrifying amount of unconditional, self-sacrificing love for your team. From RM's incredibly beautiful intellectual struggle to force his body into submission, to Jin's fierce, protective older brother discipline, Suga's hyper-focused, pain-defying musical genius, V's otherworldly, deeply soulful intuition, Jungkook's relentless, power-hungry perfectionism, Jimin's beautiful, agonizing contemporary battle against his own insecurities, all the way to J-Hope's absolute, terrifyingly flawless dominance and heavy burden as the supreme dance commander. Every single member flawlessly, perfectly completes the magnificent, complex puzzle that makes BTS completely untouchable on the world stage. It begs the ultimate, heavily echoing question that will forever linger in the minds of anyone who has ever watched them absolutely dominate a massive stadium. Would their final, breathtakingly synchronized performances be nearly as magical, deeply impactful, or historically legendary if every single one of them learned at the exact same robotic speed? Or is it specifically their beautiful, painful, and vastly different individual struggles in that suffocating, mirror-lined room that truly breathes an indestructible, profoundly human soul into their music? Until the very next time we dive deep behind the glittering, heavy curtains of your favorite global superstars, keep your eyes wide open, never stop asking the hard questions, and absolutely never, ever underestimate the brutal, beautiful, and deeply unseen grind that physically builds the impossible dreams we all relentlessly admire.